It's Thursday, January 17th, 2019. Zach Parker, a close associate of the Gucci Gang, is behind the wheel of his car, pulling out of a gym car park. But the 23-year-old doesn't get far. From the shadows, a gunman emerges. Bullets tear into the car. Parker is hit. The attack is swift, precise. The shooter wasn't there to scare him, he was there to finish him. Emergency services race to the scene, but for Parker, it's too late. He is pronounced dead where he sits. He had allegedly secured drugs on credit from the Gucci Gang, a Finglas-based group operating under the Hutch-Kinahan cartel. But before he could sell them, authorities seized his stash. In Irish Gangland, it didn't matter that the drugs were confiscated. The debt still had to be paid. The Gucci Gang's leadership, including Mr. Flashy, wanted it clear. Debts were not forgiven. But what they didn't anticipate was the chain reaction this murder would set off.
10 people have died in gang-related violence so far this year. 5 of those deaths are related to a feud in Coolock.
The 22-year-old victim of the latest Gangland murder in the capital had survived previous attempts on his life.
Whelan was perceived to have made disparaging comments on social media about one of the other Feud murder victims, Sean Little. That was a factor in his murder.
The generation of younger men are becoming involved in organised crime and putting their own lives and the lives of others in danger.
Low-level dealing now is enough to have you, with your life taken.
In the months that followed, his murder would spark a wave of retaliation killings, dragging more and more people into the cycle of bloodshed. This is the story of the Coolock feud. Coolock and Darndale, 2 neighbouring districts in North Dublin, had long been hotspots for drug-related crime. Unlike previous years, when crime bosses operated discreetly, this new generation of gangsters was younger, more reckless, and eager to prove themselves. For decades, North Dublin had been plagued by drug feuds, but the arrival of crack houses in Coolock and Darndale took things to another level. Authorities were struggling to control the epidemic, as addiction-fueled petty crime, burglaries, muggings, and violent intimidation became rampant. Yet, these were only surface-level symptoms of a much larger issue. The gang networks that controlled the trade were waging a war for dominance. At the center of this violence was a Finglas-based gang operating under the Kinahan cartel's umbrella, often referred to in the media as the Gucci Gang. This group was led by a young but feared figure known as Mr. Flashy. His gang specialized in cocaine distribution, using teenage runners and social media to grow their influence. Unlike older, more calculated crime syndicates, this new generation of criminals thrived on visibility, posting photos of luxury cars, designer clothes, and stacks of cash online. Despite their power, the group was far from stable. It was fractured, with internal betrayals and unpaid debts fueling disputes. One of the key figures in the Coolock feud was Sean Little, a young, ambitious drug dealer from Coolock who had managed to carve out a space for himself within Dublin's growing cocaine trade. He was well connected, particularly to junior members of the Kinahan cartel, and used these ties to source significant quantities of drugs. While he wasn't at the top of the food chain, his growing influence and business operations made him a rising figure in North Dublin's gangland. One of Little's closest associates was Zach Parker, a small-time dealer who handled street-level distribution. Parker was more than just an associate. He and Little were lifelong friends, and their success saw them taking luxury trips to Dubai, spending drug money on high-end cars and designer clothes. By late 2018, tensions between rival gangs were reaching a breaking point. Sean Little's growing drug network had begun to encroach on territories controlled by more established criminals, including Mr. Big, a crime boss who oversaw much of Coolock's drug trade. This expansion created friction, and Little's increasing influence was viewed as a threat by multiple factions, including the Finglas-based gang, led by Mr. Flashy. When Zach Parker found himself in dangerous waters, it deepened fractures within Coolock's already fragile gangland. His mounting debt intensified tensions between rival factions that had long been teetering on the edge of war. Some sources suggest that Parker's debt may have been as high as €200,000, though others believe it was significantly less. Regardless of the amount, it was money that Parker didn't have. Despite Parker's criminal past, those who knew him outside of the drug world saw him differently. Friends described him as a decent, likable man, someone who had been trying to build a better life. One of the people most affected by Parker's death was Sean Little. He had lost his closest friend and business partner, and instead of backing down, he vowed revenge. He made it clear that he wanted payback for Parker's murder, putting himself directly in the crosshairs of those responsible. At Parker's funeral in January 2019, Little posted pictures of them together, calling Parker his brother and making veiled threats about revenge. Despite his deep ties to Parker, Mr. Flashy was notably absent. Instead of attending, he posted imagery online around the time of the service, keeping a calculated distance from the gathering. His absence spoke volumes, fueling speculation that he had either sanctioned Parker's murder or, at the very least, wasn't interested in avenging it. This deepened a growing divide within the Gucci gang, between those demanding retribution and those more concerned with maintaining business and avoiding police scrutiny. The funeral laid bare the fractures that had been forming within the gang. One faction, led by Sean Little and his associates, wanted blood for Parker's death, feeling betrayed by the lack of response and left questioning the involvement of their own leadership. Then, there was the other side of the Gucci gang, still loyal to Mr. Flashy. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, but it wouldn't take long for them to erupt. Sean Little had spent months looking over his shoulder, making it well known that he intended to go after the people responsible for Parker's death. That kind of talk was dangerous in Dublin's underworld. Retaliation was inevitable. On May 21st, 2019, emergency services were called to a burning car near Walshestown. When they arrived, they found a black Opel Insignia engulfed in flames. 10 feet away from the wreckage, lying motionless on the gravel, was Sean Little. He had been shot multiple times, once in the head and once in the chest. The execution was precise, calculated, and final. His body was left in the open, abandoned on the side of a desolate road, a sight meant to send a message to his associates. His growing aggression following Zach Parker's killing was said to have unsettled many within the gang. While multiple theories exist about why he was executed, the most widely believed is that he had become a liability. Little had publicly vowed revenge for Parker's murder, making no effort to hide his intentions. But while he was pushing for retaliation, others in the Gucci gang, particularly those still aligned with Mr. Flashy, were more cautious. Another possible factor is that Little's influence within the gang had become a growing concern. He was known to have ties to the Kinahan network, reportedly associating with figures like Lee Byrne, son of Cartel member Liam Byrne. His connections may have allowed him to bypass Mr. Flashy's authority, leading some to see him as a potential threat to the gang's existing hierarchy. Ultimately, the exact reasons behind Little's murder remain unclear. Some will swear they know the truth, probably even commenting rumors they've heard on this video like they're facts. But the real truth is buried within the inner circle of the Gucci gang, the only ones who truly know why Sean Little was taken out. Within hours of his body being discovered in Balbriggan, his associates began arriving at the scene. Among them was Hamid Sanambar, a 41-year-old Iranian who had been closely linked to Little. He stood with grieving family members, including Little's father, as they tried to process what had happened. But beneath the grief, suspicions were simmering. Sanambar, who had been a visible figure within the gang's ranks, quickly found himself under suspicion. Some of Little's closest associates began to question why he had been so quick to arrive at the scene and whether he had prior knowledge of the killing. The rumors only grew as details of the murder became clearer. Little's associates were convinced that Sanambar had played a role in the setup. But before they could act, another murder shook the city. Less than 24 hours after Little was executed, his close friend Jordan Davis was gunned down in broad daylight. The cycle of violence had reached a terrifying pace, and this time, the brutality unfolded in full view of the public. On May 22, 2019, at around 4 p.m., Davis was walking along Marigold Road in Darndale, pushing his 4-month-old son in a buggy. Just 10 minutes before his death, he had posted a tribute to Little on Facebook, sharing a photo of the two of them together with the caption, "Rest in paradise, you were a gent." As Davis strolled with his infant son, he spotted the gunman approaching. Witnesses later described how he immediately realized what was about to happen. He turned and ran, trying to escape. The assassin pursued Davis. Davis was shot multiple times, collapsing to the ground while his baby remained unharmed in the buggy. His killer cycled away from the scene, leaving the 22-year-old bleeding out just yards from Our Lady Immaculate National School, where parents picking up their children were left in shock. The brazen nature of the execution stunned the community. This wasn't just gang members settling scores in back alleys. This was a war spilling onto the streets, where children played and families lived. The timing of Davis's death was suspicious to authorities. He had been murdered minutes after posting about Sean Little, making it almost impossible to dismiss as a coincidence. An anonymous account left a mocking comment under Davis's tribute. The message read, "You're resting with him, ha 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 ha." The comment was quickly deleted. His murder was seen as a direct continuation of the feud that had begun with Parker's execution. One theory was that Davis had been killed over an unpaid drug debt. He had been heavily involved in the local drug trade, operating within a network that included both Parker and Little. It was suspected that he owed money to the same Kinahan-linked Gucci gang that had ordered Parker's execution. Some sources claimed his debt was as high as €70,000, an amount he had no realistic way of repaying. A known enforcer had been demanding repayment from him in the weeks leading up to his death. Whatever the motive, the pace of the killings had accelerated beyond control. 3 murders had taken place in the space of a week. The Gucci gang was splitting at the seams, paranoia was at an all-time high, and trust was disintegrating fast. And then, just a few days later, the violence reached a new level. 7 days after Sean Little's execution, friends and family gathered at the Little household for a wake. Among those in attendance was Hamid Sanambar, a surprising presence given the rumors that had begun circulating in the days after Little's murder. Sanambar had been spending time at the Little household in the aftermath of Sean's death, seemingly aligning himself with the grieving family. His actions leading up to the killing had raised suspicions, and some believed he had double-crossed Little. Despite these suspicions, Sanambar walked into the house, paying his respects as if nothing was wrong. Whether he was there to genuinely show solidarity or to gauge the atmosphere is unknown. As he stepped out of the house and onto the driveway, 3 masked gunmen were already waiting. The killers, armed and prepared, opened fire without hesitation. Sanambar was shot multiple times in the head and chest, collapsing in the garden of the Little home. He died almost instantly. The attackers then fled the scene in a Toyota Avensis, which was later found burned out. Originally from Iran, Hamid Sanambar had arrived in Ireland seeking asylum and was later granted permission to remain. Over time, he became involved in the criminal underworld, forming connections with multiple gangs, including factions linked to the Kinahan cartel. Despite being older than many of the younger gang members he associated with, he had embedded himself in Dublin's gang scene and was often seen alongside figures connected to the Gucci gang. Sanambar had a reputation as a violent enforcer, someone who handled dirty work for higher-ranking criminals. He had reportedly spent time in Cork and Longford before settling in Dublin, where he became more involved in gangland activities. He was rumoured to have been a hitman for hire, though much of his reputation was built on fear and speculation, rather than confirmed actions. In the aftermath of Sean Little's execution, suspicions began to surround him. Authorities launched a major investigation into the killing, quickly identifying a primary suspect. The man, whose name has not been disclosed, was in his 30s and originally from Dublin. He fled Ireland shortly after the murder. For years, he managed to stay under the radar, moving between various locations in Spain. However, in July 2024, Spanish police arrested him over an unrelated minor crime in Costa del Sol. It was only after his arrest that officers realized he was the subject of a European arrest warrant issued by Irish authorities for his alleged role in Sanambar's murder. Further investigation revealed that the fugitive had spent his time in Spain, associating with notorious criminals. Authorities were able to link the suspect to Sanambar's murder through forensic analysis of a burner phone recovered during the investigation. The phone contained crucial data, placing him in the vicinity of the hit, strengthening the case against him. Despite the arrest, the investigation into Sanambar's execution remained ongoing. Authorities believed that multiple individuals had played a role in setting up and carrying out the hit. While Sanambar was wiped out, Stephen Little, Sean Little's father, still wanted blood. He was convinced there were more people responsible for his son's death. In the months after his son's murder, Stephen Little's life unraveled. He lost his marriage, and any sense of normalcy was gone. He became obsessed with tracking down his son's killers, and by September 2019, he had a target in his sights. Authorities suspected that Stephen had been planning to assassinate Whelan Smith, a Hutch-Kinahan cartel hitman with a violent track record. Smith had already established himself as a ruthless enforcer before the Coolock feud even began. In 2017, he had been hired by the Kinahan cartel to murder Hutch associate James Margot Gately, a man who had survived multiple attempts on his life. Gately miraculously survived, and Smith went on the run. For 2 years, Smith continued operating in gangland circles, moving between various factions within the Kinahan network. By the time the Coolock feud erupted, his name kept surfacing in police investigations into contract killings, intimidation, and drug enforcement. Stephen Little believed that Smith had been one of the key players involved in Sean's murder, either as an executioner or someone who sanctioned the hit. But Smith wasn't an easy target. Unlike low-level gang members, he was well protected, constantly on the move, and had the backing of the Kinahan cartel. On September 14th, 2019, Little and his associate, Edward McDonnell, were pulled over at Lyne Park, Harmonstown, by authorities. They had been under surveillance for weeks, with police believing a retaliatory killing was imminent. When officers searched the vehicle, they uncovered a loaded G9 semi-automatic pistol, 2 balaclavas, 2 baseball bats, gloves, multiple mobile phones, a can of petrol, and a long-handled lighter. It was the perfect kit for a hit. Little didn't bother lying about what he had planned. When questioned by authorities, he admitted everything. He said, "Had you given me another hour, I would have killed the bastard that killed him." Then he added, "I lost my marriage and my son." Little and McDonnell were charged with possession of a firearm in suspicious circumstances. Initially, McDonnell pleaded not guilty, but halfway through the trial, he changed his plea to guilty. Little was sentenced to 6 years in prison, while McDonnell received 9 years, with McDonnell's long history of violent offences factoring into the decision. While Stephen Little's revenge attempt failed, Whelan Smith didn't escape justice for long. In 2021, he was convicted of attempted murder for the botched assassination of James Gately in 2017. The attack had been personally sanctioned by the Kinahan cartel. Smith was sentenced to 20 years in prison. By late 2019, the Coolock feud was a war with no clear sides, just shifting alliances and relentless paranoia. The body count was rising, and there was no sign of it slowing down. Owen Boylan was next. Unlike some of the other victims, Boylan had been given every opportunity to escape his fate. Authorities had formally warned him that he was a marked man, even advising him to leave Dublin for his own safety. But he ignored the warnings, convinced that he could carry on with his life. Owen Boylan was just 22 years old. By day, he worked as a postman, but he had another life as a street-level drug dealer, moving product through Coolock's local networks. He wasn't a major player, but he was deeply connected to those who were. He had been close friends with Zach Parker, Sean's Little, and Jordan Davis, 3 men who had been gunned down in the same year. After Sean Little's murder, tensions erupted online. Taunts, threats, and insults were thrown between rival groups. Authorities believe Boylan posted something about Little's death that was seen as disrespectful by Little's associates. On November 24, 2019, at around 5:15 p.m, Boylan was standing in the front garden of his home on Clonshaw Avenue when his killers arrived. A gunman approached while a getaway driver waited nearby. 9 shots rang out, hitting Boylan in the arm, chest, and upper body. His death brought the total number of gang-related murders in Ireland that year to 10. Half of them were tied directly to the Coolock feud, making it the deadliest gang war of 2019. The Coolock feud may not dominate headlines as it once did, but the violence it sparked continues to shape Dublin's underworld. It's 4:30 a.m. in Finglas, April 3rd, 2022. James Whelan, 29, is moving through the neighbourhood with at least one other man. He is armed and on his way to carry out a petrol bomb attack on a property connected to Mr. Flashy, the man he once worked under, but who had since become his rival. It wasn't long ago that Whelan had been one of Flashy's most trusted men, a senior member of the Hennessy Gang, a Finglas-based criminal organisation with deep connections to the Hutch-Kinahan Cartel. But Whelan had broken away, forming his own group. His decision to go solo wasn't taken lightly, and Flashy's crew saw it as a direct betrayal. For months, their rivalry had been growing increasingly violent. It started with robberies and assaults, but quickly escalated. Whelan's associates had been involved in a brutal attack on one of Flashy's men, stealing his high-end designer watch on a Dublin bus. Flashy's crew retaliated with a severe beating of a young lad linked to Whelan. From there, things spiraled out of control. By the start of 2022, the violence had gone far beyond personal attacks. Whelan's crew attempted to bomb a house, but they targeted the wrong property, nearly killing an innocent family. And now, just in the past 48 hours, the situation has exploded once again. On Friday night, an innocent relative of Whelan's had been targeted when gunmen opened fire on their home. The next day, Whelan's men retaliated, shooting at a house in Deanstown Avenue, believed to be connected to Flashy's crew. In the early hours of Sunday morning, Whelan was taking matters into his own hands, but what he didn't know was that his plan had already been exposed. Somewhere along the way, a member of his own crew had tipped off Flashy's gang. Authorities would later state that Flashy's men had advanced warning that Whelan was coming, likely an hour or two before the attack. As Whelan and his associate moved through the streets, an armed man was already waiting. A gunshot was fired. A bullet struck Whelan in the chest. Some sources suggest Whelan may have returned fire, but if he did, it wasn't enough to stop the ambush. By the time emergency services arrived, Whelan was already dead.
The 29-year-old was found yesterday morning on a footpath in Deanstown Avenue with a single gunshot wound, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Gardaí are now investigating the murder, which is believed to be connected to an ongoing feud between 2 gangs in the area. That rivalry emerged in Finglas in recent years, but has been simmering in recent months and has also played out on social media. Gardaí at Finglas Garda Station met yesterday evening to determine their next moves in this murder investigation as they work to trace the last steps of James Whelan. The scene was closed off for a technical examination and a post-mortem was carried out. details of which aren't being made public for operational reasons.
This was the first gangland murder in over a year, and within hours, social media was flooded with taunts and threats. One post from Flashy's side mocked Whelan's death, reading, "What did them bullets taste like, James?" Whelan's own associates quickly vowed revenge, promising, "We will finish this for you, bro, once and for all." James Whelan was born in Dublin's north inner city. As a child, his family moved to Finglas, a working-class area in North Dublin that had become a hub for drug dealing and gangland feuds. Unlike most of the young criminals in Finglas, Whelan was not a local. He was seen as an outsider, someone who hadn't grown up in the same circles as the other teenagers getting involved in crime. Rather than trying to fit in, Whelan aligned himself with a different crew, one led by Trevor Byrne, a senior figure in Dublin's underworld. Byrne was not just a local gangster, he was a major player, directly linked to the Kinahan cartel and involved in armed robbery, serious firearms offences, and kidnappings. Under Byrne's guidance, he was introduced to a higher level of criminality, moving beyond small-time dealing and into more serious operations. Whelan's ambitions became clear early on. He didn't want to be a low-level dealer forever. He wanted money, power, and influence, and under Byrne's wing, he began working his way up the ranks. His first major brush with law enforcement came in June 2011, raided his home and seized nearly €30,000 in cash. At just 18 years old, Whelan was already handling significant amounts of drug money. This wasn't the income of a street dealer. This was the kind of money that came from running an operation and managing other dealers below him. Whelan had become one of the key players within Byrne's crew. He was responsible for moving drugs, collecting payments, and enforcing control over certain areas. As the years went on, he expanded his network, built stronger connections, and became a well-known figure in Finglas's criminal underworld. However, things changed when Trevor Byrne was arrested and sentenced to long-term prison time. With his mentor locked away, a power struggle emerged in Finglas. New leaders were stepping up, alliances were shifting, and Whelan had to decide his next move. For years, Whelan had worked with Mr. Flashy. Flashy had taken over after Byrne's imprisonment and had become one of the most notorious young gangsters in Dublin, running a highly profitable drug empire in Finglas. At first, Whelan operated as one of Flashy's senior men, but in 2019, as his ambitions grew, he made the bold decision to break away from Flashy's crew and start his own operation. Whelan's used e-scooters and electric bikes to distribute across his network. His dealers, many of them young, inexperienced criminals, began using these vehicles to deliver crack cocaine and cannabis across Finglas. This system had several advantages. Scooters were fast, cheap, and hard to track. They could navigate through small alleyways, making it easier to evade authorities. Whelan's Scooter Gang quickly became one of the most successful drug networks in Finglas. He was making a fortune, and as his operation grew, so did his reputation. But his success came at a cost. When he broke away from the Gucci gang, it made him a serious threat to Mr. Flashy and his crew. Almost immediately, Whelan became a target. Flashy's crew publicly branded Whelan a rat, spreading social media taunts and threats. They warned that he was going to be killed. Whelan, however, refused to back down. The rivalry quickly turned violent. Soon, grenade attacks, kidnappings, and shootings followed as both sides escalated their war. The situation became so extreme that innocent people were caught in the crossfire. Despite the growing danger, Whelan refused to stop. He continued his public defiance of Flashy. James Whelan's murder sent shockwaves through Finglas, but his enemies wasted no time in celebrating his death. Within hours, social media was flooded with taunts, threats, and mockery. One post, allegedly from a rival gang member, asked, "What did them bullets taste like, James?" It was a direct insult, a final humiliation. If anyone thought Whelan's death would bring an end to the feud, they were wrong. Less than a month after the murder, the violence escalated again, this time targeting Whelan's grieving family. In an act of sheer brutality, Flashy's crew firebombed the home of Whelan's mother. The attack nearly killed her, forcing her to flee for her life. What made this feud different from the gangland wars of the past was the role of social media. This wasn't just about back-alley shootings and whispered threats. This was public, constant, and impossible to de-escalate. Flashy's gang posted their victories, mocking Whelan in death. This feud was never just about drugs or money. It was about power, reputation, and control. It was about young criminals refusing to be disrespected. For the young men involved in these feuds, walking away is rarely an option. Once a gang member is publicly humiliated, the pressure to respond is overwhelming. A reputation can mean everything in the criminal underworld. If you back down, you are seen as weak. It's just after 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 2023, at Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown. Two men walk into the restaurant with pistols raised. Gunshots ring out, causing panic as diners scream and dive under tables for safety.
Not even messing yet. Somebody's got to get whacked in front of me.
The place started getting shot up, lads. Boys, people are shooting.
In the middle of the chaos is Jason Hennessy, a senior member of the Hennessy Gang. He is hit multiple times. One attacker, 26-year-old Gucci Gang associate Tristan Sherry, moves closer holding a submachine gun, ready to finish Jason off. But the gun jams. Seeing an opening, some of Jason's men jump on Tristan, attacking him while the second gunman escapes out the front door. When police arrive minutes later, Tristan is already dead, beaten and stabbed nearly 30 times. Nearby, Jason struggles to breathe, seriously injured from gunshots to his neck and chest. The attack at Brown's Steakhouse wasn't random. It was a planned hit in a gang war that has terrorized Dublin for years. But who was Jason Hennessy, and why was he targeted? Born in the mid-1970s and raised in the suburbs of Blanchardstown, he grew up in Cartel, a working-class housing estate that by the 1980s had been hit hard by unemployment and an epidemic of heroin use. He was not always known as a notorious gangster. Unlike many of those around him, Jason didn't become seriously involved in crime until much later in life. In his youth, he was regarded as a promising boxer, a talented young man who mostly stayed clear of serious trouble. He lived in an area closely linked with organized crime, particularly the infamous Westies gang, who controlled much of the drug trade throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. The Westies were ruthless criminals, feared across Dublin for their violent methods, but by 2004, their gang began to fall apart when their leaders, Shane Coates and Stephen Sugg, were murdered in Spain during a bloody gang war. Although Jason had family members and friends involved in the gangs that rose after the Westies fell, he personally avoided significant criminal activity. Despite living near prominent gang members, he maintained a relatively ordinary lifestyle for many years. He worked regular jobs, including as a truck driver, and generally avoided trouble with the law. By the time he reached his 30s, Jason had established himself as a significant underworld figure in Dublin 15. He married and started a family, eventually fathering several children, even as he deepened his involvement in crime. This dual life as family man and feared gangster would earn him a unique reputation in Cardiff. He opened a local business named Hulk Recovery, a vehicle towing and repair service, providing a veneer of legitimacy to his income. Neighbors would see his tow truck emblazoned with a green Incredible Hulk logo and think he was just a hard-working businessman. Those who crossed Jason Hennessy learned quickly that his pleasant public persona masked a vicious gangster. A low-level dealer who stole from him was allegedly found bloodied and broken one night, duct-taped to a lamppost as a warning. Such tales were hard to verify. None of his victims dared file official complaints, but they helped enhance Hennessy's fearsome reputation. By the 2010s, many younger criminals in West Dublin looked up to Hennessy as an almost untouchable figure. He had money, foot soldiers, and crucially, he had never been taken down by the law in any serious way. But as his profile rose, so too did the target on his back. A new generation of gangsters was emerging from nearby Finglas, and they had Hennessy's territory in their sights. By the late 2000s and 10s, people around Coolock began referring to Jason as the Boss or Boss Man, a nickname he embraced. If you wanted to deal drugs in Blanchardstown, you either paid Hennessy a cut or faced consequences. Hennessy's crew, often referred to as the Hennessy Gang, was largely a family operation. His own sons were groomed to follow in his footsteps. As his boys grew into teenagers, Jason kept them close. By all appearances, he loved them and wanted them to have everything, except perhaps an honest living. Around this time, another figure was rising in West Dublin, a gang leader nicknamed Mr. Flashy. This younger gangster, real name insulated by the tabloids to avoid the possibility of contempt of court, ran a Finglas-based crew that was nicknamed the Gucci Gang, known for their designer clothes and luxury lifestyle. Unlike Hennessy's relatively local outfit, Mr. Flashy's gang had connections to the international Hutch-Kinahan Cartel and the remnants of the old Westies gang. In fact, Mr. Flashy's outfit was reportedly Hutch-Kinahan aligned and essentially a revival of the Westies in Finglas. Inevitably, Hennessy's and Flashy's worlds collided. They were two crime bosses operating in overlapping territories, each with an eye on dominance of West Dublin's drug trade. Some say Hennessy even met with the Finglas gang leaders at one point to draw unofficial boundaries. Blanchardstown would be Hennessy's turf, Finglas theirs. If such an underworld treaty ever existed, it did not last long. By 2017, tensions were simmering. In Coolock, Hennessy's men reportedly roughed up a few of Mr. Flashy's low-level dealers who ventured into Blanchardstown. According to one unnamed source, Hennessy's side was throwing their weight around with a string of such beatings in 2018. It was the classic setup for a gangland feud, two proud factions and one slice of territory not big enough for both. What came next would plunge West Dublin into violence on a scale not seen since the notorious Hutch-Kinahan feud on the other side of the city. Locals would come to know it as the Coolock feud. Authorities, well aware of the brewing animosity, quietly feared that it was only a matter of time before the situation exploded. And explode it did. In February 2019, CCTV cameras in Coolock captured a wild scene. Rival gunmen engaged in a broad daylight shootout on a residential street. Grainy video, later published by the Irish Mirror, showed young men ducking behind cars for cover as shots rang out in a quiet cul-de-sac. Amazingly, no one was hit, but bullet holes riddled the walls of nearby houses. As winter turned to spring, tit-for-tat attacks occurred with alarming frequency. Arson, beatings, and drive-by shootings became almost routine in parts of Finglas and Blanchardstown. In March 2019, one faction targeted relatives of a rival. Two innocent women, believed to be girlfriends of gang members, were viciously beaten in an attack, leaving them bruised and traumatized. By that point, violence was flaring on an almost daily basis. The most audacious episode came on April 2nd, 2019.
Well, Gardaí are investigating a shooting outside a school in West Dublin this afternoon.
It's a school which has about 300 secondary school pupils, and they were in school here this afternoon. There were two men waiting outside here at the gate to collect a brother of one of the men when a gunman came up and fired several shots at them. Now, no one was injured, and the gunman escaped on foot across the road into the nearby Coolock estate. Now, there's a lot of Garda activity in there at the moment. moment. Just behind us, the Gardaí are still searching, and they're carrying out searches in the Coolock estate at the moment. So far there have been no arrests, but Gardaí believe that this is the latest incident in a series of gun attacks and escalating drugs and gun violence which has occurred in this area in the last 4 months. The Gardaí believe that the violence is connected to an ongoing feuds between criminal gangs in this area and also gangs that are based in Blanchardstown and in Finglas, and it's essentially over control of the drugs trade.
Authorities later recovered a loaded handgun stashed a few yards from the scene, which was allegedly linked to Mr. Flashy's gang. April 2019 continued to deliver mayhem. In one incident that month, the feud violence spilled into a Garda station.
A criminal who attacked a rival gang member with a machete in front of a Garda station 3 years ago in an ongoing feud between two criminal gangs in Finglas and Blanchardstown has been jailed for 3 years. Martin Cunningham of Warrenstown Drive in Mulhuddard pleaded guilty to assault causing harm. His victim, Kenneth Fitzsimons, refused to testify against him in the case.
Cunningham told Fitzsimons he was going to chop him up before he knocked him to the ground and slashed him deeply in his arms, legs, neck and torso. Fitzsimons, however, managed to get up and run into the Garda station, where he bled on the floor of the reception area. He was operated on but recovered without further complications. Fitzsimons, who is currently in jail after he was caught with a gun, then refused to give evidence against Cunningham and said he wished to withdraw his complaint and drugs had affected his memory. Detective Sergeant Damien Mangan testified that Fitzsimons told the Gardaí that Cunningham was a bigger fool for pleading guilty to any charge and that he would have walked free if he had said nothing. The code of omerta, or silence among gangsters, and its impact on the criminal justice system is evident in today's case. With little evidence against Martin Cunningham, apart from the victim's testimony, the charge of attempted murder against him had to be dropped. Although he pleaded guilty to assault causing harm, the maximum sentence is 5 years in prison, and although Ms Justice Eileen Creedon sentenced him to 4 years with the final year suspended today, that sentence has now effectively been served.
It was said he was furious that his home had been shot at and his autistic younger brother put in danger during an earlier feud incident. In May 2019, just after midnight on a quiet street, thugs firebombed a house belonging to someone connected to the feud. They smashed the windows with hammers, doused the interior with petrol, and set the home ablaze. Flames engulfed the property within minutes. 2 men inside jumped from an upstairs window to escape the fire, barely cheating death as the building was gutted. By the summer of 2019, the Coolock feud had transformed parts of West Dublin into a conflict zone. Houses were being shot at and torched. Gang members were stalking each other in broad daylight. Innocent family members were sucked into the violence. Garda patrols in Blanchardstown and Finglas increased dramatically, and armed detective units carried out raids to seize weapons. But the flow of arms kept coming, largely thanks to Mr. Flashy's pipeline to the Hutch-Kinahan cartel. A Garda surveillance operation even found that Irish military grenades had been sourced by gangsters. Amid this chaos, Jason Hennessy managed to avoid personal harm. Garda intelligence indicated Hennessy was very much in the crosshairs. By late 2019, things had calmed slightly, but the feud was far from over. As the feud dragged on into 2020 and 2021, a stalemate took hold. It wasn't peace, more a tense ceasefire punctuated by low-level skirmishes. There were still beatings and petrol bomb attacks here and there, but nothing like the frenzy of 2019. Jason used this period to shore up his organization. He tightened his inner circle, leaning more on family members whom he felt he could trust with his life. Chief among these were his 3 sons, Jason Jr., Devon, and Brandon Hennessy. The older 2 were in their mid-20s, while Brandon was still a teenager, but all 3 had grown up around their father's criminal enterprise. By 2020, they were acting as his trusted muscle. Evidence of the sons' involvement surfaced in January 2021, when authorities conducted a surveillance operation near the Technological University Dublin campus in Blanchardstown. Acting on a tip, officers watched as an off-road motorbike drove onto some open ground by a sports field at dusk. Two figures, one of them identified as Brandon Hennessy, then only 17, dismounted with shovels and a large package wrapped in plastic. As one began to dig, the other stood guard. The police moved in, catching the pair red-handed, attempting to bury a stash of drugs with an estimated street value of over €32,000. Brandon tried to sprint away through the darkness, but officers chased him down and arrested him in a nearby cemetery. Later, in January 2025, when Brandon eventually appeared in court for the drug stash, he pled guilty. The judge noted that Brandon had no prior serious convictions, was very young, and had recently endured the trauma of seeing his father shot in front of him. The judge gave Brandon a suspended 3-year sentence, essentially sparing him prison on the condition of good behavior. Through 2021 and 2022, the feud was still alive. Sporadic shootings at houses and attacks kept occurring, though at a reduced pace. But both gangs were feeling the pressure of constant Garda monitoring. Each major incident brought a wave of arrests. It became costly and risky to keep up the cycle of violence. Some in Dublin's underworld speculated that Hennessy and Mr. Flashy had reached an unspoken truce by 2022. Behind the scenes, however, tensions and grudges festered. It was in this charged environment that an extraordinary Garda operation took place in mid-2023. Acting on intelligence of an impending hit, officers intercepted a car in Dublin's north side and discovered a loaded revolver inside. They believed they had just foiled a planned assassination attempt against associates of Jason Hennessy Sr. Still, Jason Hennessy Sr. was defiant. He wasn't going to run or hide from a rival on his own turf. In the months before Christmas 2023, he appeared to carry on life normally. He continued to run Hulk Recovery and to spend time at his regular spots in West Dublin. He had survived 5 years of feud-induced chaos and was still standing. As Christmas approached, he made plans to celebrate in style. On Christmas Eve, he organized a private party at Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown. At 8 p.m., as the Christmas Eve dinner was in full swing, 2 gunmen armed with handguns and a submachine pistol stormed into Brown's Steakhouse. Witnesses described one attacker, later identified as Tristan Sherry, spraying bullets indiscriminately across the dining area. Patrons dived under tables amid screams. Hennessy Sr., sitting at the center of his party's long table, was the primary target. Sherry advanced toward him, firing. Bullets tore into Jason's upper body. One struck his neck, another his torso. According to some accounts from that night, Hennessy had actually stood up and tried to confront the gunman when the shooting began, perhaps attempting to disarm him or shield others when he was gunned down. The truth of that moment is known only to those who were there. Several of Hennessy's associates fought back. They tackled Tristan Sherry after he momentarily paused, likely due to his weapon jamming. The second gunman, who has never been publicly identified, fled out the front entrance. Sherry, left alone and now overpowered by a mob of Hennessy's men, met a gruesome fate. He was dragged to the ground and beaten to death within moments. Sherry was stabbed again and again with steak knives grabbed from tables and was bludgeoned with whatever items came to hand. By the end, Sherry had sustained 27 stab wounds to his chest and trunk and fatal blunt force trauma to the head. Officers found Sherry's mangled corpse on the floor and the infamous gang boss, Jason Hennessy, barely clinging to life. Medics fought to stabilize Hennessy on the scene. He was still alive, but just barely. Hennessy was loaded into an ambulance and rushed to hospital under armed police escort. He was placed on life support and, due to the severity of his wounds, later transferred to the Mater Hospital in the city for specialized care. Back at the steakhouse, detectives began gathering evidence. The Garda press office would later confirm it was connected to the Coolock feud. Jason Hennessy Sr. clung to life for nearly 2 weeks. Despite multiple surgeries, the damage from the gunshots particularly the wound to his neck, proved too great. He was pronounced dead on January 5th, 2024, at age 47. The official cause: gunshot injuries to the neck and upper torso. With that, Jason Sr., the crime boss of Coolock, was now counted among the fallen in Ireland's Gangland wars. The Garda now had two parallel cases, one for the shooting of Jason Hennessy Sr. and one for the beating death of Tristan Sherry. The investigation into Hennessy's murder focused on identifying the second gunman and any masterminds behind the plot. Given the circumstances, suspicion fell on the opposing faction, essentially associates of Mr. Flashy's gang. There were rumors that Sherry and the other hitman had been paid or coerced to carry out the attack, possibly as part of a larger plan by Flashy's crew. However, in the immediate aftermath, no arrests were made in relation to Hennessy's shooting. The second gunman had vanished. For the time being, the murder of Jason Hennessy Sr. remained officially unsolved. The case of Tristan Sherry's death, on the other hand, produced swift arrests and would move rapidly through Ireland's justice system. The steakhouse was full of witnesses and CCTV, and many of the attackers were identified on the spot by responding officers. In the chaotic scene, several of Hennessy's associates, those who had stomped and stabbed Sherry, were themselves injured, cut by flying glass, and were treated, then promptly taken into custody that same night. Within days, at least 7 suspects were in custody related to Sherry's killing. Among them were 3 teenagers and several men in their 20s from the Coolock area. Notably, Hennessy's youngest son, Brandon, was arrested and later charged, not with murder, but with violent disorder for his role in the melee. Video evidence clearly showed Brandon striking Sherry, albeit with a lightweight dustpan, after the gunman had been disarmed. Others detained included Michael Andricut, Noah Musweni, and David Amar, who were believed to have delivered the most severe blows to Sherry. Another suspect, Wayne Deegan, was also charged later, bringing the total accused of direct involvement in Sherry's death to 8. Given the gangland nature of the incident, the trials were slated for the Special Criminal Court, Ireland's non-jury court for organised crime, to mitigate any risk of jury intimidation. The court heard that Andricut stabbed Sherry multiple times with a knife, beat him with an iron bar, and even paused to take a photograph of Sherry as he lay dying. Amma, only 17 at the time of the incident, was seen stomping on Sherry and wielding a chair to strike him. The sheer ferocity captured on video left little doubt as to intent. The defense lawyers argued for a manslaughter verdict, claiming their clients had acted in provocation, that the sudden shock of witnessing Hennessy's shooting caused them to temporarily lose self-control. But the prosecution countered that what followed was not a momentary, uncontrollable outburst, but a calculated, sustained assault. The Special Criminal Court judges concurred. In February 2025, in a unanimous judgment, the court found Andricut, Musweni, and Amma guilty of the murder of Tristan Sherry. Brandon Hennessy, Jonas Kabangu were convicted of the lesser charge of violent disorder for their involvement. While the courts worked through these cases, the Hennessy Gang as a unit began to crumble. Without Jason at the top, his crew had lost its unifying force. His eldest sons, Jason Jr. and Devon, tried to assert control, but they were now under intense Garda surveillance. In fact, law enforcement swiftly took the opportunity to mop up remaining elements of the gang. Just weeks after Hennessy's death, in January 2024, Garda scored a major victory against his outfit by seizing 2 revolvers and €33,000 worth of drugs from a hidden arms stash in West Dublin. The raid, carried out on a patch of wasteland in Blanchardstown, was described in the media as a huge blow to the remaining Hennessy associates. On the streets of Coolock and Finglas, the atmosphere following Jason's death was tense. There were certainly murmurings of attempts to avenge him. The Irish Sun reported that Hennessy's allies were scouring social media photos to identify anyone linked to Tristan Sherry, potentially marking them for attack. But overt revenge from Hennessy's side never materialized in a major way, likely because most of those capable of it were now behind bars or under scrutiny. In mid-January 2024, authorities anticipated the funeral could be a flashpoint for further violence or a target for a possible attack. Armed officers patrolled discreetly, scanning for any sign of trouble or unwanted guests. The funeral itself was a spectacle steeped in the kind of gangland theatre that Dublin has seen in other high-profile gangster send-offs. The Hennessy family organised an Incredible Hulk-themed cortege to honour Jason's nickname and business brand. His coffin was custom-made, painted a bright green with the image of the Hulk's fist and emblazoned with the words, "The Boss Man," along the side. The Hennessy Gang effectively fell apart in the months that followed. Jason Jr., Devon, and Brandon Hennessy soon found themselves entangled in serious charges of their own. On February 12, 2025, Barry Moore arrived at a house connected to the Hennessy brothers on Sheep Hill Avenue, Corduff. Expecting a normal conversation with people he had known his entire life, he had no idea he was walking into a trap. Once inside, he was beaten, tortured, and branded like an animal.
More than 100 Gardaí swarmed several properties in Blanchardstown this morning, bursting down doors in an effort to locate a man they believe was being tortured and held against his will. This major operation is part of an investigation into an alleged abduction and torture of a man earlier this week. It's understood the man was burned during a sustained attack that took place over a number of hours. His injuries are described as non-life-threatening, but they are life-changing, and the man is heavily traumatised. Gardaí believe this incident is the latest in a series of violent attacks that have taken place in West Dublin for more than a year.
Moore had been an associate of the Hennessy Gang, a notorious crime group operating in West Dublin. He was accused of being a rat after police had seized firearms and drugs from a field in Corduff earlier that week. The gang believed he had leaked information to the authorities, and in their world, there was only one punishment for that. They were the sons of Jason Hennessy Sr., a well-known crime figure who had been shot dead in a Blanchardstown restaurant on Christmas Eve in 2023. Since their father's murder, the brothers had tried to hold on to their family's reputation, using violence, drug dealing, and intimidation to maintain control. Joining them in the attack were Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son Dean Fitzsimons, both from Castlecourage Gael. They were close associates, deeply embedded in the gang's operations. On that night, Barry Moore arrived at the house and was let in through a black steel door by Jade Hennessy, a female relative of the brothers, where he was confronted by Jason, Devon, and Brandon. Initially, the conversation seemed normal, but everything changed when Jason Jr. suddenly snatched Moore's phone from his hand. Before Moore could react, Jason punched him in the face. Jason demanded that Moore tell the truth, though it was never made clear exactly what he was expected to confess. What is clear is that the gang had already made up their minds. He was a rat, and he was going to pay the price. At some point, Kenneth Fitzsimons retrieved a 5-foot steel bar from somewhere in the house. He swung it at Moore's legs, hitting him 7 or 8 times with full force. Brandon, the youngest of the 3 brothers, then took the bar and continued the attack, beating Moore all over his body. Jason Jr. then grabbed a branding iron. It wasn't an ordinary one. It had been customized with the word R.A.T. engraved into it. He held it up and said, "He'll talk after this." He then pulled out a camping stove, ignited it, and began heating the branding iron. At that moment, the door swung open and Dean Fitzsimons entered the room, riding a Surrey electric motorbike. He rode straight at Moore, running over his legs. As Moore groaned in pain, Dean laughed and said, "I've been waiting for you." Dean then picked up the steel bar and attacked Moore again. He grabbed an axe, turned it around, and began beating Moore with the blunt end of the weapon. The attack lasted around 20 minutes and Moore had no way of defending himself. The gang then progressed into torture, which I cannot describe on YouTube, but Moore later described that he thought he was about to be murdered. At some point, someone decided that the branding iron was hot enough. Jason Jr. took it and pressed it against Moore's stomach. The iron was pressed into his skin not once, but 6 times. Moore later told police he had never felt pain like it before in his life. Jason asked, "Who set me up at Costa Coffee?" Moore insisted he didn't know, but Jason didn't believe him. He then branded Moore on the side of his face. Brandon suggested they should pull down Moore's tracksuit bottoms and rip him with a stick. Fortunately, this didn't happen. And just like that, they let him go. But before Moore left, they wiped his phone, deleting all his messages. He stumbled out of the house, severely injured, and somehow managed to drive to a relative's home before collapsing. He was barely able to speak, but it was clear to his family that something horrific had happened. Emergency services were called, and Moore was rushed to the hospital. Doctors assessed his injuries, and while he was stabilized, it was immediately clear that he had been tortured. His body had burns covering 3 to 4% of his skin, along with deep bruising, possible fractures, and severe swelling. On February 13th, Moore gave his full statement to the authorities, detailing every moment of the attack. With Moore's statement in hand, authorities wasted no time. They moved quickly, obtaining search and arrest warrants for multiple properties linked to the gang. At 7 a.m. on February 15th, 2025, more than 100 officers launched simultaneous raids on multiple properties across Coolock and Blanchardstown. This wasn't just a routine arrest, it was a full-scale takedown. One of the main targets was the Hennessy family home, the same house where Moore had been tortured just days earlier. Armed officers forced their way inside, clearing the property within minutes. In the backyard, they found a small garden shed. Investigators believed this was where Moore had been interrogated. By the end of the operation, all 5 men had been taken into custody. Each of the 5 men was charged with assault, causing serious harm and false imprisonment, both of which carry potential life sentences. They were also charged with production of an article in the course of a dispute, referring to the branding iron, steel bars, and axe used in the attack. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the accused remained defiant in court. Dean Fitzsimons became aggressive, shouting at officers, telling them to f*** off, before apologizing to the judge shortly after. Jason also interrupted proceedings, angrily denying ownership of multiple vehicles linked to him. He said, "They were my father's trucks, so watch what you're f***ing saying. Don't be saying they're mine." Judge Paula Murphy denied bail, ruling that the men posed a serious risk to witnesses and public safety. All 5 were remanded in custody and sent to Clover Hill Prison. With their leaders behind bars, the Hennessy Gang's grip on Coolock is shattered. For years, they had ruled through violence and intimidation, but now their tactics had backfired. The Hennessy Gang had built their reputation on fear, but in the end, their paranoia destroyed them. They turned on their own, tortured one of their own associates, and left behind enough evidence to ensure they wouldn't be walking free anytime soon. For years, their father had built a reputation as a dangerous and ruthless figure, deeply involved in organized crime, drug trafficking, and feuds. But his empire came crashing down when was shot dead in the middle of a crowded restaurant on Christmas Eve, 2023.
Place started getting shot up, lads. Boys, people are shooting.
Not even messing yet. Somebody's got to get whacked in front of me.
His murder was chaotic. That night, Jason Sr. had been dining in Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown when a gunman, Tristan Sherry, stormed in and opened fire. But Sherry's plan backfired. Almost instantly, he was overpowered by Hennessy's associates, who beat and stabbed him to death inside the restaurant. CCTV footage captured the carnage. And when the dust settled, both Hennessy and Sherry were dead. 6 men were later charged with Sherry's murder. With their father gone, the Hennessy brothers saw themselves as his successors. Each of the 3 brothers had been involved in criminal activity long before their father's death, but after he was killed, their actions became even more reckless and violent. Devon Hennessy, the eldest of the 3 brothers, had been involved in the Coolock Feud, a long-running gang conflict that saw multiple shootings, stabbings, and firebomb attacks between rival factions. Authorities had warned him several times that his life was in danger, even issuing him a Garda information message, an official notice that he was a marked man. In August 2024, just months after his father's death, Devon survived an assassination attempt while driving a bulletproof BMW. Gunmen targeted him, opening fire, but the reinforced vehicle saved his life. This was actually the second time someone had tried to kill him. Back in 2019, a car he was traveling in was shot at 5 times. Devon managed to escape unharmed, but when questioned by authorities, he refused to cooperate. In March 2020, he was convicted of violent disorder after attacking a man outside a courthouse. The situation escalated so quickly that 20 officers were needed to bring it under control. As he was being restrained, Devon screamed at his target, "You are a dead man." In September 2024, Devon was convicted of drug dealing after he was caught with a stash of cocaine near Clover Hill Prison. Even though he had been warned his life was in danger, he continued to operate in the drug trade, refusing to back down. Jason Hennessy Jr., the middle brother, had always been the most aggressive of the 3. He had a long history of violent attacks, some of which were completely unprovoked. In 2018, he was given a 2-year suspended sentence for a hammer attack on 2 men in Dublin city centre. The court heard that Jason had gone to his car, grabbed a hammer and an iron bar, and assaulted both victims, leaving one man with a 4-centimetre head wound and another with tendon damage to his fingers. In 2022, he was also convicted of assaulting 2 female officers after they stopped a family member on suspicion of driving without insurance. Instead of complying, Jason spat in one officer's face. As he was being taken into custody, he laughed at the judge, saying he expected the court to be biased, but was happy because he got 4 weeks off. Despite being the youngest of the 3, Brandon Hennessy was already deep in the criminal world by the time he was 17. In January 2021, authorities caught him burying cocaine worth over €32,000 near Blanchardstown. He was part of a surveillance operation, and when officers moved in, he tried to flee. He was eventually caught and arrested. 3 years later, in early 2025, he was given a 3-year suspended sentence for drug trafficking. The court heard that despite his age, he had been acting as a trusted dealer for his father's gang, helping to store and distribute large amounts of cocaine. After their father's death, the Hennessy brothers launched a campaign of terror in Coolock. Anyone who they saw as a threat was targeted. Firebomb attacks became common, with innocent families caught in the crossfire. One of the biggest escalations came just days before Barry Moore. Authorities had raided a field in Coolock and seized 2 firearms and a stash of cocaine belonging to the gang. The Hennessys were convinced that someone inside their own circle had leaked information to the police. Instead of looking outward, they turned on their own, with Moore becoming their primary suspect. This level of paranoia and violence was proof that the gang was spiraling out of control. Once, they had been feared, but now they were making reckless, irrational decisions, attacking their own people and leaving behind too much evidence. The Hennessy name, once powerful in Dublin's underworld, was starting to crumble from the inside, and the attack on Barry Moore would be the final act. It's May 24th, 2016, and Gareth Hutch is walking toward his car. The 35-year-old father of 1 is just going about his day, not knowing that his life will end in a few moments. As he steps closer to his car, two gunmen appear. Without warning, they open fire. The first shot hits him in the chest, the second in his head. Gareth collapses, a few feet away from the car. His young son, Preston, watches in horror, an innocent child forced to witness the execution of his father. This wasn't a random attack. Gareth Hutch, a nephew of the notorious Jerry the Monk Hutch, was caught in the crossfire of a deadly gangland war that by this point had already claimed 6 lives, but would go on to claim many more. His death, at the hands of Kinahan gunmen, was part of a larger retaliation, a direct response to the murder of David Byrne, a key figure in the Kinahan cartel, just months earlier. This wasn't just about turf wars or business rivalries. This was personal. To understand the feud that had claimed Gareth Hutch's life, you need to understand the two families at war, the Hutch family and the Kinahan cartel. The Hutch family, led by Jerry the Monk Hutch, had been a fixture in Dublin's underworld for decades. From the 1980s, they had built their fortune through armed robberies, heists, and illegal smuggling. As their wealth grew, so did their influence, eventually giving rise to a tight-knit criminal empire. While the Hutch crew had begun to diversify into more legitimate business interests by the 2000s, their roots were still deeply planted in the criminal world. On the other side of the war, the Kinahan cartel was an empire built by Christy Dapper Don Kinahan. What started as a small-time operation in the 1970s eventually grew into one of Europe's most powerful drug trafficking organizations, with a reach spanning Ireland, the UK, and mainland Europe. By the mid-2000s, their operations were global, with Spain and Dubai serving as hubs for laundering money and running illicit business. When Daniel Kinahan took over leadership, the cartel became ruthless. Unlike the Hutch family, which maintained a more family-oriented, close-knit structure, the Kinahan cartel operated like a corporate empire, with its own hierarchy and precise operations. The Hutch and Kinahan groups were not always enemies. In fact, there were periods of cooperation and overlap. Gary Hutch, Jerry Hutch's nephew, moved to Spain after a prison term and became an associate of Daniel Kinahan, effectively working within the Kinahan operation. He was even described as once having been Daniel's right-hand man. By 2014, cracks in the alliance began to show. Tensions reportedly arose over suspicions of betrayal within the ranks. An incident in August 2014 hinted at the storm to come. An ex-boxer named Jamie Moore was shot and wounded in Marbella while training at a gym associated with Daniel Kinahan. It turned out to be a botched hit. Moore was an unintended victim in what was believed to be an attempt on a Kinahan associate, possibly Daniel himself. This shooting in Spain was a precursor. While not officially part of the Hutch-Kinahan feud, it foreshadowed the violent mistrust bubbling beneath the surface. The real trigger, however, came the year after. Most sources agree that the feud truly began on 24 September 2015, when Gary Hutch was murdered in Spain. The circumstances around Gary's death and its aftermath set off the chain of revenge that continues to reverberate. Gary Hutch, 34, was gunned down late morning inside a gated apartment complex in an area of Marbella. A well-known Dublin criminal, Gary had been living in Spain for about 8 years after his release from prison. He had prior convictions for armed robbery. On that day, an assassin cornered Gary at the complex. Unarmed and realizing his fate, Gary reportedly pleaded for his life, but the gunman showed no mercy and shot him dead. Gary's close ties to both families made the fallout explosive. In 2014, he had fallen under suspicion. Kinahan loyalists believed Gary was a rat, an informant for Spanish police. It was later suggested this allegation was false, but in the gangland world, even a rumor can be a death sentence. What makes the murder particularly tragic is that attempts were made to spare Gary's life. Behind the scenes, Jerry Hutch, Gary's uncle, negotiated with Hutch-Kinahan to resolve the dispute peacefully. According to later court evidence and media reports, a deal was struck. As punishment for Gary's perceived treachery, another Hutch associate would take a bullet in a staged shooting. Incredibly, Gary's own brother Patrick Hutch volunteered to be shot in the leg by Hutch-Kinahan, apparently to satisfy the Kinahans' demand for retribution without killing Gary. This bizarre agreement, essentially a sacrificial shooting, did occur. Patrick survived the leg wound. Additionally, the Hutch side reportedly paid €200,000 to the Kinahans as part of this agreement to spare Gary's life. Despite taking the money and staging the punishment shooting, the Kinahan leadership ordered Gary killed anyway. There was speculation that Hutch-Kinahan personally ordered the hit after luring Gary with false promises of safety, though officially, Daniel has not been charged. James Quinn, a Dublin criminal and Kinahan associate, was convicted in 2018 for involvement in Gary's killing. Quinn had acted as a lookout and helped the shooter escape. Notably, the Spanish court recognized the murder as part of the Kinahan-Hutch feud. Quinn received a lengthy prison term of 22 years, but the triggerman and those who ordered the job remained at large. In Dublin, Gary Hutch's funeral was a tense, grief-stricken event. The Hutch family publicly claimed they did not want revenge, a message perhaps aimed at de-escalating the situation or avoiding further provocation. But whether or not Gerry Hutch wanted revenge at that moment, the wheels of violence were already in motion. The Kinahan side, fearing retaliation, was not about to rest either. Within 2 weeks of Gary's murder, the Kinahans struck at the Hutch family again, this time behind bars. On the 9th of October 2015, Derek Delboy Hutch, Gary's younger brother, was stabbed repeatedly while serving a prison sentence in Dublin's Mountjoy prison. Derek, a hardened criminal himself, survived the attempt on his life. It was later reported that a €10,000 bounty had been placed on him by none other than Christy Kinahan Sr. At this point, late 2015, a sense of dread gripped Dublin's underworld. Everyone knew that Gerry Hutch would not let this go unanswered forever. Rumours swirled that the Hutches were plotting revenge on Hutch-Kinahan, who had retreated to the safety of his Spanish base. Meanwhile, Kinahan gunmen in Dublin seemed to be proactively targeting anyone linked to the Hutch family, trying to choke off any reprisal before it could happen. This pattern became evident in the next killing of 2015. As the year drew to a close, Darren Kearns, a 33-year-old criminal associate of the Hutch family, was shot dead in front of his wife in Dublin. Kearns had just left a Chinese restaurant on Black Horse Avenue when he was ambushed and killed. Investigators believe Kearns was targeted for a botched assassination on a Kinahan gang member sometime earlier. Like many early feud murders, no one has been charged for Darren Kearns' killing as of the latest reports. If there was any doubt a feud was underway, the bloodletting of 2016 erased it. The new year would see an explosion of violence that shocked Ireland and made international headlines. On the afternoon of the 5th of February 2016, Dublin's Regency Hotel was hosting a boxing weigh-in event for a WBO lightweight title fight. Among the attendees were members of the Kinahan Cartel, including Hutch-Kinahan himself. Around 2:30 p.m., a group of 4 armed men stormed the hotel, disguised as police in tactical uniforms and carrying AK-47 assault rifles. The gunmen opened fire in a brazen assassination attempt. Panic ensued as people dived for cover. One of the attackers was bizarrely dressed as a woman wearing a wig. Hutch-Kinahan narrowly escaped, as he had left the event minutes before the shooting started. However, David Byrne, 34, was shot dead in the attack. Byrne a senior cartel member and close friend of Daniel, took multiple bullets and died on the scene, making him the first Kinahan casualty of the feud. 2 other men were wounded by gunfire but survived. The Regency Hotel shooting was an unprecedented act of gangland vengeance. Never before had criminals carried out such a military-style assault in broad daylight at a public event in Ireland. The gunman fled in a van, later found burned out not far away. It became immediately clear that the Hutch side had struck back ferociously for the murder of Gary Hutch. It was widely believed that Daniel Kinahan was the primary target, and David Byrne was killed essentially in his place. The Regency shooting marked a turning point. The Hutch group proved they could hit the Kinahans at the top, and the Kinahans now had a very personal vendetta, the loss of one of their own. Authorities scrambled to respond. Within weeks of the attack, a special crime task force was established to focus on the Kinahan-Hutch feud. This unit, part of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, set about preventing further bloodshed. A daunting task, as the feud was only beginning. Patrick Hutch, younger brother of Gary Hutch, the same Patrick who had been shot in the leg in the earlier failed deal, was charged with the murder of David Byrne. It was alleged Patrick was one of the disguised gunmen at the Regency. His trial at the non-jury Special Criminal Court began in 2018, but dramatically collapsed in February 2019 when the lead detective on the case died by suicide. With critical evidence in disarray, Patrick Hutch's murder charge was dropped. He walked free, and to this day, no one has been convicted of Byrne's murder. Years later, in August 2021, Gerry Hutch himself was arrested in Spain on a European warrant related to the Regency attack. He was extradited and tried in Dublin in late 2022. In a verdict that made headlines, Gerry was found not guilty of Byrne's murder. 2 associates, however, were convicted of facilitating the shooting by providing vehicles. Back to 2016, and if the Hutch side thought the Regency attack settled the score for Gary's murder, they were gravely mistaken. The Kinahan cartel responded almost immediately and with brutal clarity. Just 3 days after the Regency shooting, on the evening of the 8th of February 2016, Eddie Hutch Sr. was gunned down in his own home.
They believe a 4-man hit squad was involved in this attack, and it's a relatively short distance away from the Regency Hotel, scene of last Friday's audacious attack, and detectives believe the 2 incidents are linked. Last Friday's murder is understood to have been retaliation for a murder in Spain last September.
Eddie, aged 59, was one of Gerry Hutch's brothers. Unlike some of the younger Hutch men, Eddie was not a violent gangster. He was a taxi driver by trade and considered a relatively innocent member of the extended family.
There's a fear in the community. But Mr. Hutch would have been a hard-working guy. He was a taxi man, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Very quiet individual, went about his business, and to my knowledge was not a player in serious crime.
Media described Eddie Hutch as a soft target, killed to send a message. Since the Hutch gunmen who did Regency were in hiding, authorities launched an investigation into Eddie's murder. But yet, as of latest reports, it remains unsolved, though it's widely accepted Kinahan operatives carried out the hit. Each side now had fresh blood to avenge, though notably, from here on, the Kinahan side would do most of the killing, determined to cripple the Hutch faction for good. On the 29th of February 2016, another man was slain in Dublin's Gangland, though this case has a question mark over its connection to the Hutch-Kinahan feud. Vincent Ryan, 25, was shot in the head at close range while sitting in his car outside his partner's home in Finglas. Vincent was the younger brother of the late Alan Ryan, a notorious real IRA militant who had been involved in Dublin's criminal feuds before being killed in 2012. Vincent Ryan's murder was carried out by Kinahan gunmen, and indeed it occurred just weeks into the feud. However, not all sources agree it was part of the Hutch-Kinahan conflict. Some believe Vincent's killing might have stemmed from separate issues. In later court proceedings, it was reported that Kinahan cartel members were behind the hit, though their exact motive remains debated. The bloodletting continued into the spring. On the 23rd of March 2016, Noel King-Size Duggan, a 55-year-old close friend of Jerry Hutch, was shot dead outside his home in Ratoath, County Meath, north of Dublin. Duggan had just parked in his driveway when assailants opened fire through his car window. Known as King-Size for his involvement in cigarette smuggling, Noel Duggan was not a violent gangster, but he was a longtime pal of the Hutch family and had been seen in Jerry's company often. This was yet another blow to Jerry Hutch. His inner circle of friends was being picked off. The investigation into Duggan's murder remains open, with no charges filed as of recent reports. April 2016 saw 2 murders just days apart, one of which tragically involved an innocent bystander. On the 14th April 2016, Martin O'Rourke, 24, was shot dead in broad daylight on Sheriff Street, North Dublin. Martin was a vulnerable young man with no criminal ties. The shooting was a mistaken identity case. The gunman had been hunting a Hutch target in the area and wrongly identified Martin as the target, killing the wrong man. This appalling error highlighted how reckless the feud had become. Even civilians were at risk. Authorities later indicated they believed the shooter was Glenn Clark, a Kinahan hitman. Clark would himself meet a violent end. More on him shortly. Less than 2 weeks later, on the 25th of April 2016, the Hutch side suffered another loss. Michael Barr, 35, was shot dead at the Sunset House pub in Summerhill, Dublin. Barr, a known Irish Republican, was a friend to the Hutch group. Crucially, he was suspected of involvement in the Regency Hotel attack, likely in supplying the AK-47s used or otherwise facilitating the hit on Byrne. 2 masked gunmen stormed the pub and killed him in a swift attack.
A Kinahan gangster and convicted drug dealer with 59 convictions here and in the UK. Christopher Slater's DNA was found on a mask and a runner thrown into the getaway car before it was set on fire. The following day, Slater flew out of Dublin on a long-haul flight to Bangkok via Dubai, which he had booked just 3 hours before on a suspicious mobile phone with no checked or hand luggage. Miss Justice Tara Burns said today that no rational explanation exists to point to his innocence and that on the DNA evidence alone, the court finds him guilty of murder. Slater is the 4th person convicted following the Garda investigation. His friend and fellow hitman Eamon Cumberton is serving life in prison for the murder, as is the 3rd killer that night, UK hitman David Hunter. A 4th man, Martin Aylmer, was jailed for 6 years for buying the mobile phones used in the murder.
That marked one of the few feud-related murders in which a perpetrator faced full justice. The feud's death toll had climbed steadily. In just 2 months after Regency, Kinahan operatives had killed 5 people. Most were in or around Dublin's north inner city, turning those neighbourhoods into flashpoints. The Hutch side was clearly on the defensive, their ranks dwindling as friends and family fell. On the morning of the 24th of May, 2016, Gareth Hutch, 36, was getting into his car outside the Avondale House flat complex when 2 gunmen approached and opened fire, fatally wounding him. Gareth was a nephew of Jerry Hutch, another member of the extended Hutch family targeted. Unlike some of his cousins, Gareth was considered a minor figure in the underworld. The hit was efficient and merciless, carried out in a residential parking lot in front of witnesses. The investigation into Gareth's murder was successful in identifying those responsible. In November 2018, the Special Criminal Court convicted 3 individuals for the killing: Jonathan Keogh, his sister Regina Keogh, and an associate, Thomas Fox. All 3 were found guilty of murder and handed life sentences. Notably, they were an independent gang who undertook the contract, likely paid by or under direction of the Hutch-Kinahan cartel. The feud raged into the summer, on the 1st of July 2016, David Douglas, 54, was shot dead outside his shop on Bridgefoot Street in Dublin 8. Douglas was a former boxer and long-time criminal associate of the Hutch Gang. He had actually survived a shooting attempt in November 2015. However, this time, the gunman finished the job. As Douglas stood outside his wife's shop, which he co-ran, he was shot multiple times. The killing was particularly ruthless, occurring in a busy area in the middle of the day. The investigation into David Douglas's murder eventually led to a major breakthrough. Freddie "Fat" Thompson, a first cousin of Liam Byrne and Key-Kinahan lieutenant, was arrested and later convicted for orchestrating Douglas's murder. In 2018, Thompson was found guilty and given a life sentence for this crime. His conviction was a significant win for law enforcement. It also confirmed that the Hutch-Kinahan cartel ordered Douglas's murder. Perhaps the most tragic incident of the feud occurred on the 17th of August 2016, when an innocent holidaymaker was mistaken for a Hutch and killed. Trevor O'Neill, 41, a Dublin City Council worker, was vacationing with his family in Costa de la Calma, near Magaluf in Spain. While walking with his wife and children, a gunman approached and shot Trevor 5 times in front of his family. Trevor was not involved in crime at all. Authorities believed the Kinahan shooter misidentified him as a Hutch family member. The Spanish and Irish police cooperated to investigate. The name Glenn Clark emerged. Clark, a Kinahan-affiliated hitman, was believed to be Trevor O'Neill's killer. Justice in this case took an ironic turn. The suspected shooter, Glenn Clark, was found dead himself just a few months later, in December 2016. Thought to be involved in multiple botched hits, including Martin O'Rourke's. On the 2nd of December 2016, Clark was discovered dead in a stolen car in Leixlip, County Kildare, shot through the head. There was no sign of another shooter. Intriguingly, the bullet was never found, leading investigators to suspect Clark accidentally shot himself while handling the gun. However, his family disputes this, implying foul play. A coroner would later return an open verdict in 2020 due to lack of evidence of suicide or murder. Some underworld sources hint that the Kinahans may have executed Clark for bungling operations, since both O'Rourke and O'Neill were mistaken identities, essentially eliminating their own hitman to cover tracks or out of anger. In any event, Glenn Clark's demise was counted as a casualty of the feud. As 2016 drew to an end, the Kinahan onslaught persisted. On the 22nd of December 2016, just before Christmas, Noel Duck Egg Kerwin, 62, was shot dead in front of his partner outside his home in Clondalkin, West Dublin. Kerwin was a lifelong friend of Jerry Hutch. He had no major criminal record beyond minor offences. He was essentially targeted for his association with the Hutch family. In fact, his fate may have been sealed when he was photographed chatting with Jerry at Eddie Hutch's funeral back in February. The Kinahan killers reportedly chose Noel Kerwin as a soft target. The Kerwin murder would be the last feud killing of 2016, capping an incredibly bloody year. Authorities' efforts by this point were in overdrive. Many plots were foiled, firearms were seized, and detectives were closing in on the network behind these shootings. In Noel Kerwin's case, while the triggermen were not immediately caught, investigators managed over time to unravel parts of the conspiracy.
The Kinahan gang had put a tracking device on the 62-year-old grandfather's car, and a senior figure in the organised crime group monitored his movements on a laptop from an apartment at the Beacon South Quarter in Dublin. Declan Brady was in that apartment. His DNA was found on a toothbrush there, and he also drove the other gang leader around in the back of a car with tinted windows. Detective Superintendent Mark O'Neill said the Gardaí had recovered the tracking device and downloaded the information on it, along with phone evidence, CCTV footage and surveillance of Brady and other Kinahan gang members. Brady is the fourth person to be jailed for his role in the murder, along with Martin Aylmer, Jason Keating and Michael Crotty.
The vast majority of victims were connected to the Hutch family, either members, relatives or friends, as the Kinahan side unleashed a campaign of revenge. Only one of the 2016 victims was aligned with the Kinahans, and 2 innocent men were caught in the crossfire. By 2017, the feud entered a new phase. The initial frenzy of revenge hits had subsided slightly, partly due to intense Garda surveillance and partly because the Hutch side was essentially lying low or had been decimated. But violence still flared. It was a year of cat and mouse between the gangs and law enforcement, with undercover operations, preventing murders, and international hitmen entering the fray. One chilling indicator of the feud's reach behind bars came in March. An inmate named Tom Fox, who was awaiting trial for the 2016 murder of Gareth Hutch, was attacked and stabbed in Mountjoy Prison on 28 March 2017. Another prisoner joined in the assault, and Fox suffered multiple stab wounds. Thankfully, he survived. Fox's role in the Gareth Hutch case made him a target for revenge or silencing. Perhaps the most dramatic police operation of the year took place on the 4th of April 2017, when authorities raided a safe house in West Dublin and arrested 3 Kinahan associates, including a hired hitman, in the safe house, which was owned by a Kinahan-linked man named Eric Fowler. Officers found a cache of weapons and a list of Hutch targets. Among those arrested was Imre Arakas, a 58-year-old Estonian national, infamous as a contract killer known as the Butcher. The Hutch-Kinahan gang had brought Arakas to Ireland to carry out hits. However, it appears someone tipped off the police about the plot, possibly Eric Fowler himself. Fowler's alleged cooperation with authorities may have saved lives, but it marked him for death by his own cartel. We will revisit Fowler's fate later. A long-time Hutch associate named James Margot Gately had wisely fled Dublin and was hiding out in Belfast. Gately was extremely high on the Kinahan hit list. They blamed him for having a role in the Regency Hotel attack, although he was never charged for it. On the 10th of May 2017, Gately drove down to Dublin, perhaps thinking it was safe. As he parked at a Topaz petrol station in North Dublin, a gunman in a black Lexus pulled up and opened fire, pumping 5 bullets into Gately's car. Miraculously, Gately survived. He had the foresight to wear a bulletproof vest, which absorbed 4 shots to his chest. 1 bullet hit his jaw, seriously injuring him, but not killing him. The attack was the second attempt on Gately's life in 6 months. The investigation revealed a far-reaching conspiracy to murder Gately, orchestrated by Kinahan leaders using encrypted messaging. Several men were later arrested and prosecuted. In 2020, Cowlan Smith was convicted of attempted murder for being the gunman who shot Gately. An accomplice, Gary McAreevy, was convicted of helping burn out the getaway car. That same year, authorities nabbed Peadar Keating, a senior Kinahan operative who admitted to directing the activities of the hit team targeting Gately. He was effectively the on-ground coordinator who recruited Arakas and others. Keating received 11 years in prison. Despite proactive policing, the feud still saw deadly success for the Kinahan side in 2017. 3 murders that year are attributed to the feud, each victim connected to the Hutch group in some way. On the 31st of May 2017, Michael Keogh, 37, was shot dead in his car in an underground car park on Dorset Street, Dublin.
The body of the latest victim of the ongoing murderous feud between 2 criminal gangs in Dublin was removed this afternoon from the place where he died. Michael Keogh was found by a council worker, shot dead here in an underground car park in Sheridan Court at around 10 to 10 this morning. Originally from Sean McDermott Street, Michael Keogh grew up in Dublin's north inner city. He had just started a new job in construction and was on his way to work early this morning when he was ambushed. The 37-year-old father of two lived here in the flat complex beside the underground car park. He was shot a number of times and was found lying across the front seats of the Volkswagen car, the car keys still in his hand. Gardaí believe Michael Keogh was shot dead at least 2 hours before his body was discovered. A grey Opel Astra, believed to have been used as the getaway car, was found on fire earlier at around 7:30 this morning on nearby Clonliffe Avenue. Fitted with false number plates, it had been stolen last month. A gun has also been found.
This case is complex. Keogh had Kinahan links, but was also friendly with certain Hutch associates. Notably, Michael was the brother of Jonathan and Regina Keogh, the siblings later convicted of killing Gareth Hutch. Michael himself had been seen with Hutch-aligned figures like Jason Buda Molyneux, a prominent Hutch ally. It's believed the Hutch-Kinahan cartel executed Michael Keogh, fearing he might flip allegiance or because of those friendships. Yet authorities haven't fully ruled out other possibilities. Keogh had various underworld connections and could have been killed by another rival or even set up by someone on the Hutch side as a double cross. Still, the dominant theory is that Keogh was punished by the Kinahans for perceived disloyalty. As of recent reports, no one has been charged in his murder. On the 22nd of October 2017, Jamie Tig Ennis, 24, was shot dead outside a house on Moatview Avenue, Coolock.
The body of the latest Gangland murder victim in Dublin was removed today for a post-mortem from the place where he was shot dead. Shocked and saddened family and friends were here at the scene to grieve and pay their respects. 24-year-old Jamie Ty Ennis was chatting with a group of male and female friends on the footpath here on Moatview Avenue in Coolock at 2 this morning when a gunman shot him in the back of the head. The getaway car, a black Audi A3, was found burnt out in Finglas. Gardaí are appealing for people with information to come forward and are trying to identify and speak to the people who were with the victim when he died.
He was known to police with prior assault and firearms charges. Jamie was an associate of the Hutch crew. He was friends with Jason Molyneux and others. His killing mirrored Michael Keogh's in its rationale, believed to be carried out by the Hutch-Kinahan cartel to eliminate anyone affiliated with the Hutch group. However, Jamie had a broad array of criminal contacts. Authorities could not definitively pin his murder on the Hutch feud alone, leaving open the possibility of other underworld motives. To date, insufficient evidence links the Hutch group directly to Jamie's death, so it stands as presumably a one-way hit by Kinahan interests. No charges have been brought. On the 1st of December 2017, Cain McCormack, 24, was found shot in the head in a field in Walterstown, County Meath.
The body of the 24-year-old male was discovered in a remote field in Walterstown, near the Meath-Kildare border, yesterday at 11 a.m. He was subsequently identified as Cain McCormack from Clonee in County Meath. They say Cain McCormack parked his 04D silver Peugeot 307 in a supermarket car park in Clonee village at 5 p.m. on Friday. There he got into a black saloon-type car that drove towards Dunboyne. Shortly after 6 p.m, Gardaí found a black Audi saloon car on fire at Meekstown Cottages.
He had gone missing the day before after telling his partner he was off to meet someone, and when he didn't return, they grew worried. The murder of Cain McCormack was particularly significant in that he was the son of a previous feud victim. Cain's father was Noel Kerwin, who had been killed 1 year earlier. It's thought that Cain wanted revenge for his dad's assassination and might have been plotting against the Kinahans. The Hutch-Kinahan gang appears to have struck first, viewing Cain as a potential threat. Cain had been officially warned by police that his life was in danger, a common Garda practice when someone is on a hit list. He also had some involvement with dissident Republicans and was caught with ammunition weeks prior, which suggested he was planning something significant. 2 men were arrested, but both were released without charge leaving the case unsolved. By the end of 2017, the Hutch side had not managed to kill any further Kinahan members since the Regency, aside from possibly Michael Keogh, but he was actually linked to both gangs. Authorities set up surveillance on likely targets and hitmen, foiling plots such as the Gary Hanley attempt in November. Another Hutch associate, he had multiple tracking devices found on his car, tipping off police that an attempt on his life was imminent. In an operation, authorities arrested several men in the act of planning Hanley's murder.
The plan was to shoot and kill Hanley at his home on the 6th of November 2017, but the Garda's Drugs and Organised Crime Unit had the gang under surveillance. Dean Howe was one of the supervisors of the operation. He took instructions from those at the top of the Kinahan organisation and directed those on the front line of the murder attempt. He was recorded chastising the getaway driver Joseph Kelly, telling him he had effed up and asking, "What are you getting paid for?" "We all have our jobs to do," he told Kelly, "but we had to do your job." 2 days later, he again warned Kelly, "We don't want any silly mistakes, right?" He later praised the getaway driver, saying, "Good man, you kept your hood up and your face down." He's been jailed for 12 years, Luke Wilson for 11 years, and his uncle Alan Wilson is serving 6 years in prison.
A few more violent episodes would occur in early 2018 before things truly simmered down. And importantly, some unfinished business remained. The Kinahans still hadn't gotten to their most elusive target, Gerry Hutch himself, nor his brother Patsy Hutch, both of whom were in hiding abroad or under heavy guard. On the 20th of January 2018, Derek Coakley Hutch, 27, was shot dead around 3 p.m. while sitting in a parked car beside Clover Hill Prison in West Dublin. He had just visited his incarcerated brother, and along with 2 friends. As the 2 friends stepped out of the vehicle briefly, a gunman struck. Derek was shot multiple times in the head at close range and died instantly. The attackers then burned out their getaway cars nearby. Derek Coakley Hutch was a nephew of Gerry Hutch and had been warned by police that his life was in danger, like so many others on the Hutch side. Despite over 450 lines of inquiry, no one has been charged with Derek's murder. It is presumed to be another Kinahan-ordered hit. Then, on the 30th of January 2018, just 10 days after Derek's killing, Jason Molyneux, 27, was shot dead at the James Larkin House Flats on Dublin's North Strand. Jason was a well-known street criminal. Reports say he had 122 prior convictions for various offences. He was also a trusted Hutch associate and a close friend of Derek Coakley Hutch. In fact, on the night he was murdered, Jason had just returned from Derek's wake. He had been paying respects to his fallen friend. As he arrived near his home, a 2-man hit team ambushed him, shooting him multiple times. Jason tried to flee, but collapsed and died from his wounds. The killers fled in a van, which they later attempted to burn near the East Link Bridge. The timing strongly indicates Kinahan retaliation. They struck Jason possibly because he was likely to retaliate for Derek's death, or simply because he was another key Hutch loyalist. To date, no arrests have been made public in his case either. With most of Gerry Hutch's close allies now deceased or in hiding, the Kinahan gang turned their gaze to a prime target who had remarkably survived thus far, Patsy Hutch, Gerry's older brother. Patsy, in his late 50s, was not involved in crime himself. He was a quiet family man. But tragically for him, he was the father of Gary Hutch, whose murder started the feud. The Kinahans likely saw Patsy's assassination as a way to psychologically torture Gerry and perhaps draw him out. Patsy had already survived at least 3 attempts on his life and had been repeatedly warned by authorities of credible threats. He took precautions. Living in Dublin's north inner city, he refused to be driven out of his home turf. But he knew danger lurked. In early March 2018, a meticulous Kinahan plot to finally get Patsy was underway, and it was only stopped thanks to extraordinary police work. On the 10th of March, 2018, Garda surveillance units were monitoring a team of suspected Kinahan operatives in Dublin. Acting on intelligence, armed officers raided a van in a car park on Gardner Street at 8 a.m. Subsequent investigation confirmed the plan. The hit team intended to cause a ruckus to lure Patsy out of his house and then gun him down. On the 27th of March, not long after the foiled van plot, ominous graffiti reading, "Patsy dies, feud ends," appeared on walls near Patsy's home. Authorities suspected this was another attempt to flush Patsy out. In July 2019, Gary Thompson and Glenn Thompson and Robert Brown, an ex-soldier who served in Afghanistan, all pleaded guilty and were each jailed for 11 to 12.5 years for their roles in the Patsy Hutch plot. In June 2020, Michael Burns, Stephen Curtis, and Kieran O'Driscoll, part of a second layer of the conspiracy, were sentenced for planning to murder Patsy Hutch. Burns got 9 years, Curtis and O'Driscoll 5 years each. Evidence showed Burns communicated via encrypted phone-giving orders. Curtis had sourced burner phones and attended meetings. O'Driscoll was to be the lookout on Patsy's street. In August 2020, 2 more associates, Patrick Curtis and Mohammed Smew, were jailed for 10 and 7 years respectively. They were part of a subcell under Hutch-Kinahan command involved in vehicles and planning. The unravelling of the Patsy Hutch plot was arguably the biggest victory for law enforcement during the feud. It prevented what would have likely been a gruesome public assassination, and it put a significant number of Kinahan operatives behind bars. Following the foiled Patsy Hutch attack in March, the Kinahan side essentially had no prominent Hutch targets left in Dublin to hit. Jerry Hutch was abroad, Patsy was now under heavy guard, Gary Hutch was long dead. Most of Jerry's nephews and friends were dead or in hiding. Still, 2 more killings in late 2018 have possible links to the feud, though by this time, motives grew muddled with other criminal feuds. On the 15th of November 2018, Clive Staunton, 50, was shot dead outside his home in Leixlip, County Kildare.
The murder of a man in County Kildare last night is linked to the Hutch-Kinahan feud.
The body of the man Gardaí believed to be the latest victim of the ongoing Hutch-Kinahan feud was this afternoon removed from the place where he was targeted for assassination. 50-year-old Clive Staunton arrived at his home here at Gleneaston Way in Leixlip last night, where his killers were waiting. A gunman first fired at least 3 shots into Mr. Staunton's van. The bullet holes were still visible in the driver's window. And although he managed to get out and tried to escape, he collapsed and was shot at least 2 more times as he lay on the ground. The suspected getaway car, an old-style silver Volvo S40, was found burnt out over 30 kilometres away, here in Manor Kilbride in County Wicklow.
Clive Staunton was distantly related by marriage to the Hutch family and was originally from Dublin's inner city before moving to Kildare. He had minor past offences, but wasn't a major criminal. Some arrests were made in this case, but as of recent reports, no one has been charged. The Staunton murder still remains somewhat ambiguous. On the 22nd of December 2018, Eric Fowler, 34, was shot dead outside his home in Blakestown. 2 gunmen waited for Fowler to come outside. When he did, they sprinted up and shot him multiple times in the head before fleeing. A burnt-out Volkswagen Jetta was found shortly after. Fowler had been formally warned by authorities that his life was in danger. His murder is interesting because Eric Fowler was a known Kinahan associate. In fact, he allegedly tipped off police about Imre Arakas in April 2017. Many believe Fowler was executed by the Kinahan cartel itself for betraying them. However, authorities also considered that Fowler's death might be connected to separate local feuds in West Dublin. As of recent reports, nobody has been charged, and police stated they have no suspect solid enough to charge for Fowler's murder. By early 2019, the shootings had largely subsided. As the feud cooled, law enforcement intensified efforts to bring down the Kinahan cartel as a whole, recognizing it as the larger menace behind the violence. In 2019, there were no confirmed Feud murders, but at least one attempted murder linked to the gangs. On the 6th of March 2019, Lee Whelan, 24, was shot 3 times while driving his van in Dublin and narrowly survived.
Alan Graham of Davin Gardens in Limerick pleaded guilty to helping a criminal gang in its attempt to murder Lee Whelan in Dublin in March 2019.
Alan Graham was jailed today for his role in the attempt to murder a rival gang member here in West Dublin just over 2 years ago. 3 months earlier, Eric Fowler was shot dead in Blakestown in West Dublin. The organised crime gang he was with blamed, without evidence and wrongly, Lee Whelan. They set up a surveillance operation on the 24-year-old, and on the 6th of March 2019, Alan Graham drove their gunman here to Blakestown Road, where Whelan was sitting in his van.
Whelan was known as a Kinahan associate. The shooting circumstances were puzzling. It happened near where Eric Fowler had been killed 2 months prior. It's unclear whether Whelan was targeted by the Hutch side, as an act of revenge, or by his own side in some falling out. Whelan suffered life-changing injuries, but lived. Later, a getaway driver, Alan Graham, was convicted and jailed for 10 years for his role in this attempted murder. The Hutch family emerged from the feud battered. Many family members were dead, and many who lived had either fled Ireland or faced their own legal troubles. Jerry Hutch, having lost several nephews and friends, managed to stay alive, reportedly spending time in Spain and Turkey under the radar. However, Irish authorities were still pursuing him for the Regency attack. In August 2021, Spanish police arrested Jerry Hutch on Ireland's request. He was extradited to Ireland to stand trial at the Special Criminal Court for the murder of David Byrne. This trial grabbed national attention in late 2022. In a twist, Jerry Hutch was acquitted in April 2023. The judges ruled there was insufficient evidence that he was one of the 6 Regency shooters, especially after a key state witness, a former associate who turned, gave inconsistent testimony. Jerry Hutch's acquittal was a remarkable outcome. It essentially closed the chapter on direct accountability for the Regency Hotel shooting. Upon release, Jerry returned to his community in Dublin. In an astonishing move that would have been unthinkable at the feud's peak, he ran for political office in late 2024, standing as an independent candidate in the Dublin Central constituency. Capitalising on a kind of folk hero status in some deprived inner-city areas, Hutch garnered significant votes, a protest vote by marginalised communities, and narrowly missed winning a parliamentary seat. Post-2018, the Kinahan cartel faced mounting heat from international law enforcement. The feud had drawn enormous attention to the Kinahans, painting a target on their backs. In January 2019, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, the Kinahan No. 2 man, was arrested in the UK. He later pleaded guilty to large-scale drug trafficking and in 2022 was sentenced by a UK court to 21 years in prison for smuggling drugs and firearms. Taking Bomber out was a huge blow, as he was effectively running the UK end of the cartel and was believed to have sponsored multiple murders. The big hammer came on 12th April 2022, when the United States Department of State and Department of Treasury announced sanctions and rewards on the Kinahan cartel leadership. The US, in coordination with Irish authorities, offered up to $5 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Christy Kinahan Sr., Daniel Kinahan, or Christopher Kinahan Jr. They also sanctioned 7 key individuals and 3 related businesses, effectively freezing any assets and forbidding US entities from dealing with them. In June 2023, Liam Byrne, brother of David Byrne, was arrested in Spain on a UK warrant related to gun trafficking. Byrne had fled Ireland earlier when the net closed in. His arrest was significant, although he has already been released on house arrest. Daniel Kinahan had been living in Dubai, believing himself untouchable. But after the US sanctions, UAE authorities reportedly became less hospitable. In 2022 and 2023, some Kinahan assets and businesses in Dubai were exposed or raided. A key associate, Johnny Morrissey, was arrested in Spain in September 2022 on money laundering charges. By 2023, the Kinahan presence in Dubai was on shaky ground, with reports suggesting they were lying low as international pressure mounted. Despite these blows, intelligence indicated that Kinahan operations continued to function in the shadows. As late as August 2022, multi-million euro drug shipments linked to Spanish Kinahan associates were still being intercepted. However, it's widely believed the sanctions and arrests have significantly curtailed the Kinahan's power. No longer can Daniel pop up at boxing events or in public. He's a wanted man internationally. By 2025, the Hutch-Kinahan feud has largely calmed. There have been no new murders directly attributed to the feud since 2018